Hey guys, and welcome for another new episode of Studio Time. And in this episode, we're going to talk about what is new in the template and how I've changed a couple of things. And one of them is very significant. So let's go to the Cubase template. I do want to point out though that in order for this video to be effective, I would highly recommend that of a previous Studio Time series. I think it was season number 3. I did a 4-part explanation of the template that I had back then. So this is expanding on top of that particular bunch of episodes. So if you're new to a template, this might actually go too quickly, what I'm saying right now, and I would recommend to see those 4 first, and then see this one. So, when we look at the template, you're going to see a couple of very familiar things, like the tracks in the upper arrangement window, the 4 mix, the 2 mix, the click, the various different markers, tempo track, signature track. So you guys have seen those before, with a couple of additional tracks that are new for this particular setup, which is the H9000R, which is the Eventide effects unit outboard that I'm using, and the Presonus digital mixer that is connecting all these synths here in studio. So quickly about that, then we see my writing tool for strings or writing tool for piano. Then we see the sub bass tracks that I use to double things like a tuba or a bass in the orchestra, which is all explained in the previous videos as well of the template. Then we see a couple of synths here that are ready to go. I'll talk about my favorite synths in the separate episodes. We see more instrument tracks. This is the first thing that's relatively very new, which is the sampler track, and I've got 5 ready to go, which means that I can quickly drop a sample in here and immediately start playing it and do some basic sampling editing if I don't want to build like a very elaborate instrument, for instance. Very handy feature of Cubase. We keep moving, we get to the audio part. Like I've explained in the other template folders here, I can re-record some things that I'm doing in the template, plus extra tracks for processing. Usually that's where you would find sound design audio samples or everything else that is audio related to a specific cue. Then we move to the template. So we see some big hits here, concert drums, big bass drums. We get to crashes, timpanis right here. So sound design hits, whooshes. We see drums, my drum library right here. This is all more in detail explained in the previous template episodes. We see my pianos, we see my bass guitars, we see a bunch of guitars here together, some sound design instruments here, quite a lot actually. And then we get to more guitars, more piano sounds, the piano from hell. I did explain that also in the previous videos, what that is, and the guitar from hell. Sound design brass, some sound design sounds, and then we get here to the string department, which I also explained in the previous episodes on the template, is that I work with expression maps. So if we look to the left here, expression map, that it's open, you can see all the expressions that are available currently for this instrument. And when you open up a MIDI part, you can program them. And you're also going to see something very interesting too, which I am now going to show here. And that is, I thought I had this set, but let's do it here. Global tracks. There we go. So now in your key edit, you can see the global tracks, which is really phenomenal. So you can see things like tempo, your signature, for instance, and you can also edit here, which is also really great. So for instance, if I set this thing to snap for a second, and I program here a meter change, so now you can, in the edit window, when you're editing your note information, you can change meter changes and you can add markers to it wherever you want. So this is a really great feature now, and a lot of composers have been asking Cubase for this particular feature, because normally you would only see it if you went out of the edit window and then in the arrangement window, but now you can see it in the edit page itself. What I was talking about is the expression maps here. So it's very easy to now program whatever articulations you want on a certain instrument, as you can see here. I also made a separate video in season 3, how to make expression maps yourself. So if you want to watch that, it's very helpful. It's an hour or so, but you start to get a really good understanding how powerful this feature is. So those are the strings right here. More strings, more strings, more strings, more strings. Then we get to string effects, brass effects. We get to the woodwinds department, and ta-da! Finally, here we go. The JXL brass is now part of the template. It's a really great sounding library. I'm so happy I finally have it in my template, and I'm so happy with the sound of it, and I'm so happy that I did this with orchestral tools to now have a really expressive brass library. So that is everything about the instruments, which is not all that different from the previous template, except for the JXL brass, which is a major addition to the template. But let's now go to my mixer window. I'm just going to click on this window, and if correct, you are now watching this. So one of the things that I added is I added a separate some separate screen sets. So group out. My template is organized very old school mixer way, where things come in as individual channels and then they're grouped together in specific subgroups to do some processing on top of it. So for instance, on each group channel, there is an absolutely brilliant sounding FEP filter Q3 inserted. And so the Q3 is a dynamic EQ, and it allows you to do some dynamic processing. So if certain frequencies are a little overbearing, you can pick that frequency and then dynamically EQ it while the music is playing. It's a very powerful tool, and almost on every subgroup there is a Q3, or actually on every subgroup there is a Q3, and the processing is slightly different on each instrument group depending on what that group really needs. So I'll talk more about this fantastic sounding plugin later. So as you can see, if I scroll to the right, I have in total 50 subgroups, and on each subgroup you see a FEP filter Pro EQ3 inserted to help processing a certain type of sound. So I'm just now opening up the bass guitar one here, and as you see, I haven't programmed a preset for this yet. Oh no, because this is the sub basses. Let's go to the live basses. Where would that be? And that should be this one. And here we go. I'm just going to select my mixer window again. And here there's some processing being done at 86 Hertz. And here is a cutoff being enabled around 21 Hertz. So the very, very low frequencies are cut off. So enough about the Pro Q3. I'll get to it later. So 50 subgroups here, then going to the master channel that we see right there. And then it goes to Cubase out, which we see right there. Let's see. We're now going to the next group, which is JXL, VST, and audio. So in this particular page, we see all the instruments, all the audio tracks, and all the VST returns. So that is all we see. Every group of instruments has a very specific icon, so it's easier to recognize: woodwinds, pianos, strings, blah, 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 effects, sound effect, percussion, more percussion, a bird means that it's a choir. So everything has its own little icon. Also on the VST returns, you will also see that I did quite some processing with the Pro Q3. So I'm going back to my mixer. So here we see these are the native instruments, trumpets, that I took some of the higher frequencies out dynamically if they are getting a little too bright. So a lot of Pro Q3 on the individual channels here in Cubase as a way to help the dynamic processing of the frequencies. Now, let's go to the next window, which is JXL Effects. So these are the auxiliary sends that I've set up in Cubase. And here you see the returns. So people that have a good memory would remember that on the previous template, I had a huge amount of effects channels and reverbs coming back. And now it's just a fraction of it. Well, why would you ask? Well, I wanted to get more processing out of Cubase. And I wanted to make sure that my Cubase sessions would run smoother, faster, and the loading times would be a whole lot faster. So what I did is the following. I offloaded a lot of the processing that normally would happen in Cubase to my individual external sample machines, and we call them the VSL machines because they're running Vienna Ensemble Pro. So EQ, certain type of processing like distortion, compression, and reverb sensor returns are now being handled by these external VSL machines and not anymore by Cubase. The result is that the amount of VST returns coming back into Cubase is reduced by almost 1,500. The amount of effects channels being created with auxiliary sends has been reduced from 54 to just 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15. 15 channels. We were at 54, now 15. 1,500 channels less. The template used to open in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. It now opens up in 37 seconds. So it's incredibly smooth and incredibly fast. And because of that, I was able to do something really cool. And I'll show you that right now. So when we are done with the cue, we have to record Sinmasters. And what are Sinmasters? Sinmaster is basically everything that you have programmed or written needs to become its own individual stem, so I can mix everything in a separate session, and then I create what is called dub slaves. Dub slaves is the mix that I create, that I send to the studio for the final mix of the film. So usually on a big action movie like Justice League, I would send 70 to 80 individual stems. If you play all the stems back at the same level, you have my mix. But during the mix of a movie, they might say, we're going to take some of the brass down because there's some dialogue. We're going to take some of the drums down because there are too many swords and clanging sounds, or the other way around. Let's make the sound design tracks way louder in the surround. let's take the strings and move them a little bit in the objects of Atmos. So a lot of possibilities for the dubbing mixer. Now, if I open up this folder, you see all these tracks here that are grayed out, which means that they're inactive currently. And if we go through the list, we're going to get to 81 tracks in total, which would averagely be how many tracks we Sinmaster. Let me make them active. So I'm going to go here and then I'm going to say enable track. Poof. And that only took 4 seconds to activate 81 quad tracks in Cubase, which is really fast. And so that is because I made my template smaller. So we see here the name of the tracks, which means that that is a way to see what you're supposed to be recording in here. So here we're looking at bass 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here you see the Darwin drum. Here we see like synth 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sound design 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. String effects, violin short, violin 2 short, viola short. So the programmed orchestral elements are always recorded separately, not as one group. And then in addition to these Sinmasters, we get all the live recordings. In this case, it was all done in London for Justice League. So I get all these files in, and then I can determine per instrument how much of the samples I want to be playing at the same time with the live guys. So let's just go. We see like brass, woodwinds, and then we have a couple of like extra tracks right here, and we also see the choir here. Now, this is a very quick way to record things in my templates. So now I'm just going to make them, I'm going to disable them because we don't need them at this point. I'm just going to close this folder. And now I'm going to bring up my VSL number 3. Okay, this is what I now want to talk about. One of my VSL 3 is open here. And I have selected the V-frame miscellaneous orchestra part 2. So if I move these 2 plugins out of the way, I'll talk about it in a second, but we're now looking at a few brass instruments that are coming back. So if we look for a second here at the tuba close and the tuba far, this is still like the old Cinebrass remix library that I used, and now we have JXL Brass. But I just want to grab this as an example how processing is being done on these VSL computers. So here we see tuba far, which means it goes to the front 2 speakers of my system. And you see the panorama is set hard left and right. We see here tuba surround, which if you see below, it goes to the next stereo output. And then in Cubase, that will go to the back. And we see here the close microphone that goes to 87 and 88. So its own stereo return in Cubase. But you see, I did the panning already here. You see that stereo pan? It's like, this is hard right, left, but I already did the panning here. So we hear the close mic more coming from the right. The other thing that we see here, there is a Pro Q3 inserted here. So there we go. I'm just opening it up. So you see I did some EQing here and dynamic processing. So there's quite a bump around 30 Hertz and with a certain Q factor. And here we see a little bump around 2.5K, and then we see an overall rise in frequencies above 7K. So Instead of doing the processing in Cubase, I can now do it per instrument in Vienna, and I'm going to save so much DSP on the Cubase side of things. The other thing, so that is some dynamic processing, dynamic EQing, I should say, sorry. But we also see here a bunch of auxiliary sends, and we see also unique reverbs here for the front and for the back. So let's just open these up. This is one, and this is one. So this is a reverb that would go to the front, and this is a reverb that would go to the back. The proverb from FabFilter is just like a mind-blowingly beautifully sounding instrument. It's incredible. The reverb is so incredibly natural. It has really incredible presets. For instance, I made my own set of presets here. Brass reverb to the front, brass reverb to the back. So slightly different settings, different brightness, different character, different release, and also a different pre-delay. So the delay, the reverb coming from the back is coming roughly 10 milliseconds later than from the front, and it gives it a more lively feeling. Obviously the mix is set to 100% because when we send an auxiliary send channel to the reverb, there's no need to listen to the original signal that goes in it. You just want to listen to the reverb. So by adding all these reverbs and EQs to my VSO machines, I avoid unnecessary processing by Cubase. You know what the benefit of that is? Because this is how I show it to you. The benefit of that is if we now go back to the template and I select my arrangement window, now for instance I can say, you know, I really want a very heavy duty synthesizer plugin to play around with. So in this case it is the Buchla easel, which is an incredible sounding synth made by Arturia. This is actually quite an expensive box if you want to buy it hardware. But you see what my processing is doing here, up here? You see like how it jumped all the way up? So you cannot even have two of these boxes open at the same time in Cubase. And I have like a very intense Cubase PC computer. And so it takes a lot of processing just for this particular synth. So I'm just going to disable the track, but it's very heavy on the DSP. So the same with Massive X, which is another really great synth made by Native Instruments, and this is the newest version of it. The Massive was the old version. This is the Massive X, the new one. I use both of them a lot. They're so different animals. So the first one is still great for very aggressive electronic sounds, and the Massive X is great for sound design, but it's boy is this a complicated synth. It takes forever to build like a really awesome sound, but it is really awesome. But also this synth can take up a lot of DSP depending on how you use it. So I'm just going to disable this one as well. So, but the beauty is by doing more DSP on the individual VSO machines, it gives you the opportunity to do more DSP oriented stuff within Cubase of things that you particularly want to do. So if I want to use a very heavy synth, I can use it, but if I want to use something that is light on the CPU and I want 50 of them, I can do that. In the previous template, the template itself was taking so much DSP already from my CPU that by doing a few things, it would push it over the edge. So in those days, I would do a lot of sound design in an empty Cubase session and then import the audio of that into my template to then start using it. Not necessarily with this template. It loads faster, it has a huge amount of DSP left, and therefore I can do more creative DSP related things in a queue that is currently open. So my advice to you is, if you have Cubase or Logic or Pro Tools, and you're using quite some DSP in the way that you work, for instance, you always have a similar type of EQ on your strings or a similar type of compression on your drums, try figuring it out if you can offload that processing to your external sample computer. Sometimes it works even for some type of computers and some type of software. If you run VSL in the background of Cubase or Logic, so more proper CPU usage is being done by the software programs. I'm not quite sure 100% how it is with Cubase nowadays, but until 2 years ago, Cubase as a software program was not fully utilizing the full DSP of a computer. There were always a bunch of cores that were simply just sitting there. And that is perfect for running VSL, Vienna Ensemble Pro, in the background of your Cubase machine, so that Vienna Ensemble Pro, a fresh program being loaded, can access that the cores and the threads that you still have available. I'm not quite sure how it works nowadays with Cubase, but it's an interesting way to spread processing over different cores and multiple threads. So, in short, very short, that is what the new template does for me right now. I would highly recommend to see the other 4 or 5. 4 are about the template and 1 is how to build expression maps. So if you watch those, you're completely up to speed. And then if you watch this, it makes more sense what I'm saying right now. Okay, I hope you liked this episode. Enzo certainly did. And I'll see you next week. Bye.